Hey y'all, welcome to the Flip Flop Barnyard. I'm Jenna. This is my assistant, my sous chef, Hope. Today we are going to be making some fresh ground whole wheat hamburger buns. And I thought that I would show you guys how I do it and why I do the different things I do. And one of the nice things about whole wheat is I have found that it does best with only one rise. So with white bread, I let it bulk rise, punch it down, and then form my loaves or my rolls or whatever, and then let that rise again and bake it. With whole wheat, I just make the dough and then form it into loaves or buns and then let it rise once and let it bake. The first thing I'm going to do when I make my bread, and is especially important with whole wheat, is what's called auto-wise phase of bread making. It's essentially adding some of your flour and your water, and also, since this is a yeasted bread, it's going to be not yeast. If it was sourdough, because it's also important in sourdough, you wouldn't be using yeast because your bread's already yeasted. But anyways, I'm going to add 3 cups of my flour. I have 3 3/4 cups of water, and then 2 tablespoons plus 3/4 of a teaspoon of yeast. This is instant yeast. You can use active dry. If you use active dry, this is very necessary, but if you're using instant, it's not 100% necessary, but it helps a lot. And I wouldn't skip this step unless I absolutely had to, because what autolyzing does is you let your bread sit with just flour and water and yeast together for 20 or 30 minutes, and it helps the flour to hydrate. With fresh ground flour, it doesn't absorb all of the water instantly, and so by letting it do this, in the end you don't end up with dry bread, because sometimes you add a lot more flour because your dough is still sticky, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that your flour hasn't actually fully hydrated, and so you end up with a denser, drier bread. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to start by putting it in my mixer. So I've got I just ground the sweet. I already did that. About 3 cups of flour. I'm not like making sure it's perfectly level. Then I sprinkle in my yeast, and then water. You want your water to be at least slightly warm. You don't want cold water because it'll put your yeast to sleep. You need it to be at least room temperature, and definitely you don't want it to go above 110 degrees. If it's above 110 degrees, it will kill your yeast. I usually warm it up to where it's still warm to touch, doesn't burn me. And then I'm just going to pour that in. And I'll give it a quick mix. I need to grab a spatula so I can scrape the sides. Alright, I'm going to scrape the sides just to get all that flour incorporated and make sure the yeast is all mixed in. I just kind of swish it around and make sure I break up any clumps. Because I have dough hooks in here, I really could probably do this with whisks. It would probably do better. But then I have to dirty up another thing and wash it. So I just as soon, because I'm going to use the spatula again anyways later. So I just as soon not dirty up any more items than I have to. As you can see, this is pretty much liquid. There's a few chunks of flour in there, but that's not a big deal. Those will dissolve, and if they don't, they'll mix in later. This is going to sit for 20 or 30 minutes, and then I will show you what it looks like when we come back. So our autolyze phase has finished, and you can see a big difference. The yeast has what they call proofed. It's been woken up, and it's eating on flour, and it's doing what it needs to do. It's really hydrated. Alright, in the last 30 minutes during the autolyze phase, I seem to have lost 1 sous chef. But maybe I gained another. I don't know. We'll see. So the first thing I'm going to do is add my oil for this recipe, and I just want to tell you this recipe is the same as the bread I use, and I did a video making bread recently, and this comes from Grains and Grit is the website, or in the YouTube channel. She has a blog and a YouTube channel, and all of her recipes for whole wheat so far I'm super impressed with. So I will link her below, and you guys have got to check her out. I'll show you how I make it, but I would highly suggest you go over and watch her video and go to her website so you can get the exact recipe and directions and see how she does it. Anyway, I've got a 1/2 cup of oil. I'm using avocado oil. You can use olive oil, coconut oil, whatever you want. I like to use avocado oil because I find that or olive, it keeps the bread more moist than coconut oil in my experience. I'm also using raw sugar. The recipe actually calls for honey. My kids and I, they don't prefer the flavor of honey bread, plus we didn't have a lot of honey from our bees last year, and It's just cheaper and easier to use sugar right now, honestly. So when you're using sugar and you're replacing honey, you need to remember that honey is twice as sweet as sugar, so I double it. So instead of a half cup of honey, I'm using 1 full cup of raw sugar, and I'm just going to add that in. And then salt. Can't forget salt, very important. I use pink Himalayan salt, and it is 3 teaspoons and plus 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I also use sea salt and real salt sometimes, but I prefer pink salt for sure. And now I need my lid because this gets a little messy. There we go. And then I'm just going to give it a quick mix. I like to give it a mix and let it stir in all those ingredients before I start adding more flour. I'm just going to start adding about half to 1 cup at a time of flour. I already have 3 cups in here. Her recipe says it calls for 9 to 9.5 cups. The thing with bread is it can vary the moisture level of your flour, brands of flour. There's a lot of varying things that can make it different. I have found the least amount that I've ever put in this bread was 10.5 cups, and most of the time it's somewhere between 11.5 and 12 cups. I don't know if it's just my wheat and the moisture level in it. I'm not sure why, but I don't get dense bread. It's because if I do less than that and stick with a 9.5, it's too sticky to deal with, and you don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and just start mixing it, and I will show you what it looks like when it's ready to be, when it's done and it's ready to eat. I'll show you what it looks like when it's fully incorporated and made a nice dough and it's ready to just knead for a little while. This is fully incorporated. I ended up using 12.5 cups of flour, which is a lot of flour, but you can see the dough is pulled away from the sides. It's a little bit, doesn't stick to my fingers, but it's still slight. It's very moist. So it's ready to knead. It needs to knead for about 9 minutes, and then I will show you guys what it looks like then, and we will be ready to form our buns, or if you're making bread, form your bread loaves at that point. Bread is done. It looks great. It's a really nice soft dough. Somebody on Instagram I follow, I think it's Our Midwestern Roots, was talking about bread dough, and you know it's perfect when it feels like an earlobe, which sounds really funny, but I was like, yeah, that's about right. So you pinch it up, it feels like pinching an earlobe, in case you pinch earlobes. Anyway, this makes 3 loaves for me, and I have these pans. So what I'm going to do is cut this into thirds, and I'm going to start making buns. I only need 12 hamburger buns, so whatever's left I'm going to go ahead and make into loaves. I'm going to use, they call it a bench scraper. I call it a dough cutter. So that's roughly a third right there, and then maybe a little less, roughly a third, roughly a third. This one is the most rectangle because it was in the middle, and I'm just lightly flouring. I don't want to add extra flour to this, but I don't want it to stick. And I've got my little pastry roller that I like using, so I'm just going to kind of roll these out. You don't want it too thin because you're making hamburger buns and you want them to rise, so I'm going to roll it to roughly, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch thick. And I'm going to use actually this is a cookie cutter. I have stainless steel biscuit cutters somewhere, but they're in a box. Nobody knows where they are. So today we actually end up picking up these plastic cookie cutters at the store because it's the only thing we could find. I could form each biscuit, each bun, and I've done that before. But I just kind of wanted something a little more uniform so that our hamburgers fit nicely. So I'm just going to roll that out and then start cutting them out. See? There's one. You want to cut one? Okay.
I want to cut one out.
Okay, you can cut one too. I have 2 sous chefs. You got it? You kind of... 2? You want to cut one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Twist it a little bit. There you go. Good job. Whoop. 3. Alright, I'm going to make it 12 of these, and then I'm going to make 1 or 2 loaves of bread.
For what?
So I used my first mass of dough, and I don't want to overwork it, so I just pushed it to the side. I'm taking a second mass and I'm rolling it out to cut more out of, and then when I'm done I'll see how much I have left and probably just put that together and then split it in half for 2 loaves. That way I'm working the dough as minimally as possible. If you overwork your dough, you kind of end up with tougher and denser bread. Alright, you gonna help? Alright, I got my 12 hamburger buns done. The girls have decided that they want to put sesame seeds on them. And I'm making 2 loaves. They're not super even. One's a little smaller than the other, but that's okay. They won't make huge loaves, but they'll still be 2 loaves and they'll be tasty. I'm using parchment paper for my bread instead of oil in my pan. It's a lot easier, and when the bread is done, I can pull it straight out to cool, and then I can reuse these sheets of parchment paper multiple times. Oops. And I can rip one. So that's in. Got this one, and then for my rolls, I have just a silicone pad down on the pan. I could use parchment paper too, but I got tired of buying parchment paper and spending money, so we got silicone pads for when we were baking on the cookie sheets. Those look good, girls. They're putting those on. I'm getting this bread ready, and then all of this is going to rise for roughly 30 minutes. It's very warm in my kitchen because of the wood stove, so it'll go pretty fast. It can go 30 minutes to an hour, but I find with this wheat bread, it rises super fast. So probably within 30 minutes, we'll be ready to bake this stuff. These buns have risen. They've risen really well. I'm excited. I'm going to bake them at 350. I'm not sure how long it will really take. I'm going to set my timer for 25 minutes and check them, and I'll let you know when they're done how long I actually baked them for. I'm just going to let the bread continue to rise, and I'll bake the bread after the bun's ready. My bread will just be really tall. They're done. They cooked for 20 minutes, not 25. Well, no, I cooked them for 25 and they were done. I temped them and they were just over 200 degrees. And wheat bread, when it's done, needs to be between 185, 195. So they're a little overdone, but they're super soft still. And they rose some more. You see, they're perfect buns. We got the hamburgers ready to cook to go on them. And yeah, they're not hard to make. They're pretty simple, and they're pretty quick for yeasted bread because they only rise one time. So hopefully you learned something, you enjoyed that. Again, I got the recipe from Grains and Grits, so you can check her out and all of her wonderful whole wheat recipes. Appreciate y'all. Thanks for hanging out in my kitchen with me today. If you're not already subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified every time we upload a video. Give us a thumbs up so YouTube will know you're enjoying this. Please comment below, and we will catch you guys on the next one.